Clara Hayes never thought a dog would change her life. She was just a social worker trying to rebuild her own routine, jogging each morning through Ravenwood Park. That's when she first noticed him. A German shepherd with one ear torn, a scar down his face, and eyes that seemed too human in their sadness. She didn't know then that this dog was the only reason a child would survive. Grace Hale was 7 years old, beloved daughter of one of the wealthiest families in town. To neighbors, the Hales were perfect. The beautiful house, the polished appearances, the charity galas. But perfection is fragile, and that October, it shattered. Grace disappeared without a trace. The police searched. Volunteers rallied. The town prayed. Yet the shepherd remained, circling the park, never leaving the place where Grace was last seen. On the third dawn, as the mist curled low and despair thickened, the dog barked with such urgency that Clara stopped. He turned, looking back at her, then limped toward the woods. She followed. What she found beneath the oak tree would haunt the town forever, and reveal that sometimes the only voice brave enough to tell the truth belongs to a dog. The fog had rolled into Ravenwood Park overnight, so thick it clung to the ground like a living thing. Street lamps glowed as faint orbs, their light swallowed before it touched the earth. Clara Hayes tightened the drawstrings of her grey hoodie as she jogged along the gravel path, her breath puffing white against the chill. It had been 3 months since she moved to the quiet Vermont town, and these morning runs were her ritual, her way of carving order into a life that had been pulled apart and remade too many times. Her sneakers crunched against fallen maple leaves. The smell of damp earth and wood smoke lingered in the air, familiar now, comforting in its own way. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of her jog, Clara sensed the stillness. Ravenwood wasn't like Boston, where the morning air had always carried sirens, voices, the shuffle of too many people in too small a space. Here the silence was wide enough to make her thoughts echo. She slowed near the bend in the trail where the trees grew closer together, branches reaching across like skeletal arms. It was there, just beyond the tree line, that she saw him. A German shepherd, not the kind that trotted happily alongside Ravenwood's joggers and stroller-pushing parents, tails wagging, collars jingling with little brass tags. This dog stood alone, motionless, half concealed by the fog. His fur was dark, mottled with patches where scars had warped the skin. One ear was gone entirely, leaving only a jagged ridge of flesh. A long scar cut across his left cheek, pale against the coarse fur. His amber eyes caught the weak light, steady and unblinking, locked on her. Clara froze mid-step, her heart giving a startled thump. She had worked in emergency rooms long enough to recognize wounds, the kind that didn't come from old age or playful roughhousing. This dog had seen violence, survived it, their gazes held, suspended in the mist. For a moment, she swore he looked less like an animal than a soldier standing at attention, alert to every shift in the air. Her mind whispered caution. A stray that size in that condition could be unpredictable. Dangerous. She should keep jogging, keep her eyes forward, let the distance swallow him. Yet something about the way he stood, not tense, not aggressive, but as if guarding, pulled at her. She thought of the children she worked with, the ones who walked into her office with eyes too old for their faces. That same mix of wariness and resilience flickered in the shepherd's gaze. "Easy, boy," she whispered, though the sound felt too loud in the hush of the park. The dog didn't move. He simply tilted his head, one ear twitching as though cataloguing her voice, filing it away for later. Then, with deliberate grace, he turned and disappeared deeper into the trees, swallowed by fog as though he had never been there. Clara exhaled slowly. She stood still for a beat longer, listening to her own breathing, the faint rustle of leaves. Her pulse pounded with a strange blend of unease and curiosity. There had been stray dogs in Boston, plenty of them, but nothing about this one had felt ordinary. She started jogging again, her pace slower now, her eyes flicking back toward the trees every few strides. The image lingered. The scar, the missing ear, those watchful eyes. It was ridiculous, she told herself, to imagine meaning in a chance encounter with a wounded animal. Yet something in her chest hummed, a quiet intuition she couldn't shake. This dog wasn't merely lost. He was waiting. By the time she finished her route and returned to her small apartment on Willow Street, the image of the shepherd had settled into her thoughts like a stone at the bottom of a river. She poured herself coffee, tried to review case notes for the day, but her mind drifted back to the fog, the scar, the gaze. She didn't know then that the encounter marked the first tremor in a storm about to break over Ravenwood, that a dog no one claimed, a soldier scarred and abandoned, would soon lead her to a child who had been hidden in the shadows of her own home. And though Clara closed her notebook and hurried to work, trying to shake the lingering chill, the memory of those amber eyes followed her, watching, waiting. The news broke the way it always did in small towns, fast, relentless, carried not by headlines first, but by whispers. By the time Clara Hayes left her office that Friday evening, the story had already spread from the grocery store checkout lines to the coffee shop counters, to the quiet murmur of neighbors leaning against white picket fences. Grace Hale, 7 years old, had vanished. The child who had once been the town's picture of innocence, blonde hair that caught the sunlight, dresses pressed to perfection, ribbons in her hair, was suddenly nothing more than a face on a poster, missing. The word itself carried weight, like a stone in the chest of everyone who said it aloud. Clara stopped at a lamppost on Main Street, where one of the first flyers had been taped. Grace's school photo stared back, a smile bright but stiff, as though coached. Beneath it, bold letters read, "Missing, Grace Hale, age 7. Last seen, Tuesday, Ravenwood Park." Clara traced the edges of the flyer with her fingertips. She wasn't assigned to the case. It belonged to another social worker in the department. But cases didn't always respect assignments. Sometimes they lodged under your skin, whether you wanted them to or not. Behind her, the town buzzed with restless activity. Parents pulled children closer as they crossed the street. Volunteers gathered at the community center to form search groups. Police cruisers idled near the park entrance, their lights flashing against the misty twilight. Ravenwood had always carried itself like a painting. Colonial houses lined in symmetry, maples spilling crimson leaves along the sidewalks, porches decorated with pumpkins in October. It was a town that prided itself on safety, on belonging. But tonight, there was a crack in the picture frame, and everyone felt it. Clara found herself walking toward the park without quite deciding to. Something about the case, about the way Grace's eyes looked in that photograph, too wary for a 7-year-old, pulled her in. At the community center, a tired-looking officer handed out maps divided into grids. Clara accepted one without a word, slipping into the ranks of strangers who had become a search party. They combed the park in rows, flashlights slicing through underbrush, voices calling the girl's name into the fog. "Grace! Grace!" The syllables stretched, echoed, then faded unanswered into the night. At one point, Clara paused by the swings, their chains creaking softly in the breeze. A child's shoe lay abandoned nearby, but it was old, cracked at the seams, nothing that would belong to a Hale child. Still, her heart gave a painful squeeze. She thought of the children she had sat with in sterile interview rooms, children who had waited for adults to notice the bruises they kept covered, the drawings they hid in their desks. Sometimes the signs were all there, but no one looked closely enough. Miss Hayes. A voice startled her. It was a colleague from the department, Tom Grayson, clipboard in hand. "I didn't expect to see you out here." "I'm not here officially," Clara said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "Just helping." Grayson gave her a look that suggested both disapproval and resignation. "Be careful. Emotions run high in cases like this." Then he walked on, leaving her alone at the edge of the playground. The search continued into the next day. Flyers multiplied, on grocery doors, pinned to bulletin boards, taped to mailboxes. Local news vans parked near the park entrance, cameras capturing every tearful volunteer and every police statement. By Saturday evening, exhaustion settled over the town. The early surge of volunteers dwindled. Only the most determined remained. Clara kept returning between shifts, walking the same paths again and again, though she knew statistically the trail was growing colder with each passing hour. It was then, on the hill above the north entrance, that she saw him again. The dog. He stood on the ridge with the fog curling around his legs, a sentinel carved from shadow and scar tissue. His missing ear caught the glow of a distant street lamp, his scarred face turned downward toward the searchers below. He didn't bark, didn't move, just watched. Clara felt the same shiver she had that first morning. His posture was unmistakable, alert, deliberate, almost as if he were overseeing the search. For one irrational moment she thought, he knows something. He's looking for her too. "Hey!" one of the officers called when he noticed the shepherd. "Get out of here!" He clapped his hands, but the dog only shifted slightly, eyes steady, before retreating into the tree line. Clara's pulse raced. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Twice now the dog had appeared near the heart of this case, always watching, never interfering. That night, back in her apartment, Clara couldn't sleep. Grace's face haunted her from the flyer she had tucked into her bag. The town was unraveling in whispers. Maybe she wandered off. Maybe someone took her. Maybe it was a stranger. Maybe it wasn't. Clara had worked long enough to know that sometimes the real danger came not from outside shadows, but from within the walls people thought safest. She thought of the shepherd again, the way his amber eyes had scanned the park, not wild, but calculating. There was a story in those scars, one that connected him to this place, and, she felt certain, to the little girl everyone was searching for. Outside, the October wind rattled the window pane. Clara pulled the blanket tighter, but no amount of warmth dulled the chill that had lodged itself in her bones. Something was terribly wrong in Ravenwood, and the missing girl was only the beginning. The third morning was cold and colorless. Mist still clung to the ground in low swirls, and the trees of Ravenwood Park stood like watchmen in the dawn light, their branches skeletal against the pale sky. Clara Hayes pulled her hood over her ears as she ran, her breath coming out in quick bursts of white. She had told herself this was routine, just another jog to keep her rhythm, to clear her head before another long day of casework. But beneath that thin excuse, there was another truth. She kept hoping the shepherd would appear again. Her shoes struck the gravel path, crunching over a carpet of wet leaves. The park was nearly empty at this hour, only the rustle of unseen birds breaking the silence. Then it came, a bark, sharp and insistent, carrying through the fog like a warning shot. Clara stopped, her heart leaping. The sound came from somewhere off the trail, deeper in the trees. Another bark followed, low and urgent, pulling her like a rope. Hunter? The name slipped out before she realized she had spoken it. She left the path, pushing past undergrowth damp with dew. Branches snagged her sleeves. Thorns scratched her calves. But the barks came again, guiding her deeper. The forest thickened, light dimming as if she were stepping into another world. Fear and instinct wrestled in her chest. What if she was wrong? What if she was being lured into something she couldn't handle? Yet something in the dog's voice carried purpose, not menace. After several minutes, she stumbled into a small clearing where the air felt unnaturally still. And then she saw it. An oak tree, massive and ancient, its trunk thick enough to swallow secrets. At its base lay a small figure. Chains coiled around her ankle, heavy and rusted, anchoring her to the roots. Her hair, tangled and matted with dirt and blood, fanned across the frost-bitten ground. Her school uniform was torn, her skin pale, lips tinged blue from cold. Grace Hale. For one terrible moment, Clara thought the child was already gone. The stillness, the smallness of the body. It looked more like a doll abandoned than a girl alive. But then, the faintest rise and fall of her chest, a shallow breath. Clara dropped to her knees, jacket already coming off her shoulders. "Grace! Grace! Can you hear me?" Her voice cracked with urgency. She wrapped the girl in the jacket, tucking the fabric around her fragile body to shield against the morning frost. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "This is Clara Hayes," she gasped, voice shaking. "I've found the missing girl. Grace Hale. She's alive, but barely. Oak clearing, north side of Ravenwood Park. Send paramedics now." The operator asked questions, but Clara could hardly register them. Her free hand hovered over Grace, afraid to press too hard against the bruises, but desperate to feel the pulse still there, faint but steady. A soft sound broke the silence. The dog. The shepherd stepped into the clearing, amber eyes burning in the grey light. His scarred face lowered as he approached, each step careful. He sniffed the child's hand, then, with a low sigh, lay down beside her. His body curved protectively, pressing warmth against her small frame. Clara froze, overwhelmed by the sight. The battered dog, once a ghost in the fog, now anchoring himself to the child as though he had always belonged to her. Grace's eyelids fluttered, a whisper of movement. For a second, Clara thought she imagined it. Then, with lips dry and cracked, the girl breathed a sound too faint to be words. Her fingers twitched, curling weakly into the shepherd's fur. Clara's throat tightened. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. We've got you." She heard sirens in the distance, faint but growing closer. Relief warred with fury inside her chest. Who could chain a child like this, leave her to die in the cold? The image of Victor and Evelyn Hale's polished smiles on the evening news came unbidden, their rehearsed grief, their perfect composure. Something in Clara's gut told her the truth wasn't what it seemed, but for now, all that mattered was keeping the child alive. She brushed the damp hair from Grace's forehead, whispering steady words she hoped the girl could feel, even if she couldn't hear them. The dog didn't move, didn't flinch when Clara's hands hovered close. He only pressed closer to Grace, his scarred head resting lightly against her shoulder. The sight was so deliberate, so human in its tenderness, that Clara's breath caught. She realized, in that instant, that this dog had not simply found the girl. He had been guarding her. Blue and red lights flickered through the trees. Paramedics rushed into the clearing. bolt cutters gleaming as they snapped the chain from Grace's ankle. Clara stepped back reluctantly, allowing them to work, her eyes never leaving the child. When she turned to point out the shepherd to one of the officers, her words faltered. He was gone. The place where he had lain was only flattened leaves, the faint trace of warmth where his body had been. "Convenient," the officer muttered under his breath, scribbling notes. Clara ignored him. She knew what she had seen, what she had felt. The scarred shepherd was no coincidence. He had led her here. As the ambulance doors closed on Grace's fragile form, Clara whispered into the fading dawn, "You saved her, didn't you?" But the forest gave no answer, only silence, and the memory of amber eyes in the mist. The emergency department at St. Mary's Medical Center pulsed with controlled chaos that morning. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the corridors in an unforgiving glow. Nurses moved quickly from room to room, their sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum, voices hushed but urgent. The air smelled of antiseptic, coffee gone stale, and the faint metallic tang of blood that never quite left a trauma wing. Grace Hale lay in room 12, her tiny body dwarfed by the hospital bed. IV lines trailed from her arms, delivering fluids to fight dehydration. Warm blankets were piled over her, though the blue tinge of her lips had not fully faded. A monitor beeped steadily, fragile proof that her heart was still fighting. Her face, pale beneath bruises, seemed even smaller, framed by the nest of pillows. Clara Hayes stood at the window outside, arms folded, watching through the glass. She had followed the ambulance here, still damp with sweat from her run, jacket dirtied by forest soil. She should have gone home, should have showered, but something in her wouldn't let her leave. She thought of the way the shepherd, Hunter, as Grace had whispered, had pressed close to the girl in the clearing. A battered animal, yet his presence had brought more warmth to the child than all the blankets in the hospital could. Clara knew she hadn't imagined it. The sliding doors at the end of the corridor opened with a hiss, and the temperature of the hallway seemed to drop. Victor Hale entered first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his suit cut sharp enough to suggest a tailor from New York, not Vermont. The shine of his shoes reflected the overhead lights as though he had walked out of a boardroom rather than into an emergency ward. His silver-streaked hair was combed neatly back, his expression carefully sculpted into a portrait of controlled urgency. His voice, when it came, cut through the hallway like a blade. "Where is my daughter? Not my stepdaughter, not Grace, just a claim of ownership, sharp and absolute." Behind him, Evelyn Hale clutched a designer handbag against her chest as though it were a shield. She wore a cream-colored coat, its fabric too fine for the damp October air outside. Her makeup was perfect, not a line smudged, but her eyes darted around the room with the tremor of a cornered animal. When they landed on the door to room 12, her breath hitched audibly. Clara turned slightly, observing from her position against the wall. The staff reacted in subtle ways. Nurses stiffening, a doctor lowering his gaze, an orderly suddenly absorbed in his clipboard. It wasn't deference she saw. It was caution, as though everyone had been warned to tread carefully around this family. Victor strode toward the nurse's station, his polished shoes striking like a gavel with each step. "I need updates immediately," he demanded. "What's her condition? Who found her? Why weren't we notified the second she arrived?" The charge nurse, a woman in her 50s, with lines carved deep from decades of night shifts, lifted her chin. "She's stable. The physicians are still evaluating the extent of her injuries." "Stable," Victor repeated, his voice dripping skepticism. "That's not an answer." Beside him, Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was soft, fragile on the surface. "I need to see my baby." She pressed the handbag tighter to her ribs, knuckles whitening around the handles. Clara watched the exchange with a tightening in her chest. It was the kind of performance she had seen too often in her work. Grief and urgency shaped into something polished, presentable, but not entirely real. A doctor approached, introducing himself as Dr. Patel, pediatric specialist. He began explaining Grace's condition: hypothermia, dehydration, bruising consistent with restraint. His voice was steady, professional, but Clara noticed how Victor's eyes narrowed with each word, calculating, assessing not the information itself, but its implications. "And what of the injuries?" Victor pressed. "The bruises, the restraint, as you call it. What are you implying?" "We're not implying anything," Dr. Patel said carefully. "We're documenting facts. Further assessments will determine—" "That won't be necessary." Victor's tone sharpened. "Our family has already arranged for private care. Specialists." This circus of speculation is not in Grace's best interest. Evelyn nodded quickly, too quickly, eyes flicking toward her husband as though seeking approval for her echo. From her place at the wall, Clara felt her jaw tighten, not in her best interest. The girl had been chained to a tree in the cold, her body littered with bruises, and here was her stepfather, more concerned with optics than healing. "Doctor." Patel hesitated. "Mr. Hale, until Child Protective Services concludes its initial review, Grace will remain under hospital observation. That's protocol." The words landed like a stone dropped into water. Clara saw Victor's jaw clench, the smallest twitch in the muscle near his temple. His smile returned a moment later, thin and practiced. Of course, protocol. But the way he placed his hand on Evelyn's shoulder, firm and pressing, carried something else, a warning disguised as comfort. Evelyn flinched almost imperceptibly beneath his touch. Clara's pulse quickened. She knew that gesture. She had seen it in waiting rooms, in intake interviews, in the subtle body language of women who smiled while their knuckles turned white beneath the table. It wasn't comfort. It was control. Victor turned then, his gaze sweeping the corridor until it landed on Clara. His eyes held hers for a long moment, dark and assessing. "And you are?" Clara straightened, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Clara Hayes. I was the one who called 911. Something unreadable flickered across his face. "Convenient," he said softly, before turning back toward the nurse's station. The word stung, heavier than its syllables deserved. Clara held her ground, but inside, unease coiled tight in her chest. Convenient. As if her presence in that clearing had been staged. As if saving the child had somehow marked her guilty. Through the glass, Grace shifted faintly in her bed. The beeping of the monitor filled the silence. Clara's gaze returned to her, this small, fragile girl who had survived the unthinkable. Around her swirled adults with polished words and careful masks, but no amount of perfection could hide the cracks Clara was beginning to see. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a war. One fought not with fists or guns, but with whispers, paperwork, and the quiet courage to look past rehearsed facades. And at the center of it all, Grace Hale lay silent. Her fate balanced on truths too many were unwilling to speak. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the small consultation room, its sterile walls plastered with anatomy charts and faded children's drawings left behind by other patients. Clara sat in the corner chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Dr. Patel scrolled through Grace Hale's medical chart on the tablet in his hands. His face, usually calm, bore lines of concern etched deeper with every page. Grace lay only a few doors down, but the walls felt heavy, as if they carried secrets that no one dared to voice aloud. Dr. Patel cleared his throat softly. Hypothermia and dehydration were expected. What we didn't expect were the older injuries. He turned the tablet so Clara could see. The screen showed skeletal scans, a child's bones rendered in shades of grey. Small white lines cut across her forearm and ribs, faint but unmistakable. Healed fractures, at least 2, maybe 3, and bruising patterns on her back and thighs, inconsistent with normal childhood accidents. Clara's stomach dropped. She had seen this before, too many times. The cases where parents insisted their child fell off a bike or tumbled down the stairs. But the breaks didn't lie. The body remembered what the voice could not speak. "She's 7, Clara whispered, her throat tightening. "There's no way these happened naturally." Before Dr. Patel could answer, the door opened quietly and a woman stepped in. Tall, with auburn hair tied neatly back, she carried a slim folder and a presence that softened the edges of the room. Her voice was low but steady. Dr. Lauren McKay, child psychology. She extended a hand to Clara. "I was asked to consult." Clara shook it, noting the firm but gentle grip. There was something grounding about McKay. Eyes that seemed to see more than what people said, but without judgment. "I just came from her room," Dr. McKay continued, setting the folder on the table. "She's not speaking, not a word since she was brought in, but she is communicating." She opened the folder and slid several sheets toward Clara. Clara leaned forward. At first, they seemed like simple children's sketches, stick figures drawn in thick, unsteady lines. But the more she looked, the colder she felt. One showed a small figure, smaller than the rest, surrounded by lines that resembled bars. Another depicted tall, shadowy figures with gaping mouths, jagged red marks for teeth. In another, chains snaked from an adult figure's hand, tethering a child to the corner of the page. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. "She drew these?" Dr. McKay nodded. "Within the last hour, I gave her colored pencils and paper, and she filled 3 sheets without hesitation. It's classic trauma expression. When children can't speak, their drawings tell us what their voices can't." Clara traced the lines with her eyes, each crude stroke heavy with meaning. The small figure pressed against the corner, the looming shadows, the cages. They weren't the whimsical doodles of a child at play. They were cries carved in crayon. McKay studied her. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" Clara nodded faintly. "Yes, too many times. But it never—" She broke off, her throat burning. "It never gets easier." Dr. Patel sighed heavily. "I'll be filing a mandatory report tonight. With the evidence of prior injuries, CPS involvement is unavoidable." He glanced at Clara with a kind of unspoken warning. "But you know what families like the Hales are capable of. They'll fight this hard." Clara thought of Victor Hale's voice in the corridor, sharp and commanding, his hand pressing down on Evelyn's shoulder like a chain invisible to anyone who didn't know how to look. She thought of Evelyn's eyes, darting, never resting. And she thought of Grace, curled under hospital blankets, silent but not safe. "What about her parents?" Clara asked. McKay hesitated. "Her mother barely looked at her during my observation. She kept checking her phone, seemed detached. The stepfather—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was polite, but dismissive. He asked if the drawings could be considered imagination, He suggested we avoid planting ideas in her mind. Clara's jaw clenched. Imagination. That word had been used too often as a shield, as if children invented their pain for sport. She needs protection, Clara said firmly. She needs someone to believe her. McKay's eyes softened, but her tone carried weight. That's why we're here. But belief alone isn't enough. We'll need corroboration. Patterns, context, testimony. Without it, courts dismiss drawings as fantasy. Clara picked up one of the sketches again. The little figure's head was bowed, arms wrapped around itself, chains curling from the margins. She imagined Grace's small hand gripping the crayon, pressing hard enough to tear the paper. Fantasy doesn't leave fractures, Clara whispered. Silence settled for a moment, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, a monitor beeped rhythmically, grounding them in the reality that the child was alive, at least for now. Dr. McKay reached across the table, tapping one drawing lightly. Notice how she uses red, only for the mouths. That suggests a specific association. Anger, shouting, maybe violence. Children don't always process events linearly. They capture emotions in symbols. And the cages. She exhaled. That imagery often points to confinement, isolation, possibly punishment. Clara shivered. The hospital air suddenly colder. She remembered the heavy chain wrapped around Grace's ankle at the oak tree, the way the padlock had gleamed in the dawn. This wasn't imagination. This was memory. Thank you, Clara said, her voice low but steady, for seeing it, for not dismissing it. McKay offered a small, knowing smile. Children often choose who they'll trust. She's chosen Hunter, the dog. That was the only word she's spoken since arriving. That bond might be our way in. Clara's chest tightened at the memory of the scarred shepherd pressing close to the girl in the frost, two wounded souls finding each other in silence. McKay gathered the drawings, sliding them back into the folder. I'll continue sessions with her daily. For now, she needs consistency, gentle presence, and protection. As the psychologist left, Clara remained seated, staring at the blank wall across from her. Her pulse thudded heavily in her ears. Every instinct told her this case was about to spiral far beyond a single incident in the woods. There were older wounds here, deeper than anyone wanted to admit. And Grace, silent but unflinching, was trying to tell them everything with the only tools she had left. Clara whispered into the empty room, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. I believe you, Grace. I believe every word you haven't said. Night had settled heavy over St. Mary's Medical Center, the building glowing like a lantern against the October dark. Inside, the halls had quieted, the frantic rush of the day distilled into the low hum of machines and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes. Clara Hayes sat in a chair by the window of room 12, her body aching from exhaustion. She had told herself she would only stay until Grace drifted off again, but hours had passed, and still she lingered. There was something about leaving the child alone that felt unbearable, even with the monitors beeping steadily beside her. Grace slept fitfully, her small body curled beneath the blankets, hands clenched into tiny fists. The rise and fall of her chest was shallow but steady. Each sound she made, a soft whimper, a sharp inhale, felt like a crack running through Clara's ribs. Clara rose once, stretching her legs, and walked to the window. From the third floor, she could see the hospital courtyard, bathed in pale light from the lampposts. The autumn fog pressed close against the glass, wrapping the building in a shroud. That was when she saw him, the shepherd. He sat just beyond the glow of the courtyard lamps, a shadow with amber eyes. His scarred face was turned upward toward the window, ears pricked despite the ragged absence of one. He wasn't pacing or restless. He was still deliberate, like a soldier keeping watch. Clara's breath caught. She placed her hand against the cold glass, almost expecting him to vanish like he had before. But he didn't move. He only sat, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the hospital, as if he knew exactly who lay inside. She whispered without thinking, "You're still guarding her, aren't you?" The words fogged the glass, but no one else heard. The night kept their secret. Behind her, Grace stirred. A rustle of fabric, the sound of dry lips parting. Clara turned quickly, heart leaping. The child's eyes fluttered open, blue, dazed, searching. Clara hurried to the bedside, kneeling so her face was level with the girl's. "Grace, can you hear me?" Her voice was soft, careful, the way one might speak to a bird, poised to take flight. For a long moment, Grace only blinked, her gaze drifting past Clara toward the window. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then, with effort, she shaped a single word, hoarse and fragile as a breath. "Hunter." Clara froze. The name struck the air like a bell. She followed Grace's gaze back to the courtyard window. The shepherd hadn't moved. His silhouette remained, unshaken by the night. Grace's small hand twitched against the blanket, reaching weakly as if she expected him to walk through the glass. Tears burned at the corners of Clara's eyes. The girl hadn't spoken her mother's name, not her father's, not even a cry for help. Only the name of the scarred dog who had lain beside her in the frost. Clara took her hand gently, squeezing once. "Hunter's here," she whispered. "He found you. He kept you safe. And he's still here." A faint flicker passed across Grace's face, the ghost of something almost like relief. Her eyelids drooped again, exhaustion reclaiming her, but her hand stayed curled against Clara's as if to anchor the truth. Clara remained at her side long after the girl slipped back into sleep. She smoothed the blankets, brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, and let her gaze return once more to the window. The shepherd was still there, watching, waiting. Something inside Clara shifted then, as certain as bone. Whatever story this child could not yet speak, the dog already knew. And whatever came next, polished lies, courtroom battles, whispered threats, Hunter was proof that Grace was not alone. Neither of them were. The Hale residence sat on Maple Avenue, a towering Victorian that seemed lifted from a postcard. Its gables were trimmed with white fretwork, the wraparound porch freshly painted, the lawn clipped with military precision. In the golden light of late afternoon, the house almost glowed, perfect, enviable, untouchable. It was exactly the kind of home that made people believe nothing truly bad could happen behind its doors. But today, Maple Avenue was not quiet. Satellite vans clogged the curb, cameras stood like sentries at the front walk, and reporters clustered in small knots, murmuring rehearsed lines into microphones. A hush fell when the door finally opened. Victor Hale stepped out first. He looked every inch the part. Expensive charcoal suit, polished shoes that caught the sun, hair combed neatly back so that the silver streaks lent him gravitas instead of age. His jaw was set in a portrait of composure, though his eyes were hard, restless, calculating. Evelyn followed, her cream blouse and pearl necklace chosen carefully to suggest refinement without ostentation. She clutched a tissue in one hand, the other gripping the railing as if it steadied her against collapse. Her eyes shimmered with tears that never quite fell. The cameras clicked in rapid succession, devouring the tableau. "My wife and I want to thank the community," Victor began, his voice firm, measured, practiced. "These past days have been the most harrowing of our lives, Our little girl, Grace, was taken from us, but thanks to tireless efforts by law enforcement, by volunteers, by Good Samaritans, she has been found. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. He paused, lowering his head for effect. We ask for privacy as we focus on Grace's recovery. She is our world, and we will do everything in our power to ensure she heals from this tragedy. Evelyn dabbed her dry eyes with the tissue, her posture that of a mother in anguish. Yet as Clara watched from the sidewalk beyond the reporters, she saw something different. Evelyn's smile didn't quite match the grief in her words. Her shoulders were pulled tight, as if bracing for something more than sorrow. Victor slid his arm around her then, his hand landing firmly on her shoulder. To the cameras, it looked like a gesture of comfort. But Clara's trained eyes caught the truth in the grip, fingers pressing down hard enough to still her, to warn her, to remind her that even here, in front of flashing bulbs, she belonged to his control. Clara's stomach knotted. She had seen that touch too many times in emergency rooms, in foster interviews, in homes where silence was enforced not by love, but by fear. One of the reporters called out, "Mr. Hale, has Grace spoken since being found?" Victor's smile was swift, polished. She is still recovering. Trauma is a difficult road, but she is strong, stronger than anyone realizes. Another question. What about reports of injuries, older ones? Is there an investigation? His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Rumors, he said smoothly. Baseless speculation. Children fall. They get bumps, bruises. To suggest otherwise at a time like this is not only cruel, it's irresponsible. Evelyn opened her mouth as if to add something, but Victor's hand tightened on her shoulder. As she lowered her gaze instead, lips pressed shut. Clara exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the crowd's shuffle. To anyone else, the Hales looked like a grieving family seeking justice. But to Clara, the cracks were widening. The mask of perfection was slipping, just enough to glimpse what lay beneath. Reporters continued firing questions, their voices layering over one another. What about the chain? Did the police find suspects? Who's watching Grace now? Victor answered each with the calm of a man used to controlling narratives. Evelyn dabbed her eyes again, careful to keep her makeup intact. The crowd dispersed slowly as the couple retreated back inside, the heavy oak door shutting firmly behind them. The cameras turned off, the hum of vans resumed, and Maple Avenue began to breathe again. But Clara remained rooted on the sidewalk, staring at the immaculate house. She could still see the imprint of Victor's hand on Evelyn's shoulder, invisible yet undeniable. It wasn't comfortable. It was a command, and she knew then, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The following morning, Clara sat at her desk in the Department of Children and Families, the walls of the office pressing in like they always did when a case began to fray at the edges. A thin stack of reports lay open before her, medical notes, preliminary police findings, intake records. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, a low, persistent hum that made her temples ache. Her supervisor, Howard Grayson, stood in the doorway, arms folded, jaw tight. His thinning hair caught the light, and his glasses reflected the papers in her hands. "You're inserting yourself too far into this case," he said flatly. "You weren't even assigned to it." Clara lifted her eyes. "I found her, Howard. Or rather," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "The dog led me to her. Am I supposed to just walk away now? Grayson's sigh was heavy, the kind meant to close a conversation. Your job is to follow protocol, to document, to observe, to hand things over to the proper authorities, not to play detective. Clara pushed back from her chair, standing so they were eye to eye. Protocol didn't save Grace. She was chained to a tree for 3 nights while we held meetings about resource allocation. A stray dog found her before we did. His eyes hardened. Stay professional, Clara. Do you understand me? This family is well connected, powerful. You push too far without evidence, and it won't be just your career at risk. It'll be this entire department's credibility. The words stung. He didn't mean to be cruel, she knew that. But he was afraid. Afraid of lawsuits, of headlines, of the ripple effects that came from crossing people like Victor Hale. She lowered her voice, though the heat in her chest didn't fade. If I back off now, she'll slip right back into their control. And next time, Grace might not survive. Before Grayson could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the hall. Detective Marcus Rowan appeared, his presence filling the doorway like a storm cloud. He was a tall man in his late 40s, his shoulders stooped from too many years carrying burdens that weren't his to bear. His rumpled gray suit smelled faintly of coffee and cigarette smoke. Clara Hayes? His voice was low, gravelly. Yes. She straightened instinctively. Detective Rowan, Burlington PD. He flashed his badge in a perfunctory way before tucking it back into his pocket. His eyes were sharp but tired, like a man who had seen too much and believed too little. Grayson gestured vaguely. Detective, she's all yours. I was just reminding Miss Hayes of her boundaries. He left without waiting for a response, the door clicking shut behind him. Rowan stepped into the office, leaning one hip against the filing cabinet. I want to go over your statement again. You said a stray dog led you to the girl. Yes, Clara replied carefully. Rowan studied her face as though weighing the truth of her words against the weariness etched into her eyes. You realize how that sounds, don't you? Clara's jaw tightened. I know exactly how it sounds. But that's what happened. Dozens of trained officers, K-9 units, volunteers scouring that park for days. And somehow, you, on your morning jog, just happened to stumble across her, guided by a mangy shepherd. His brow furrowed. Convenient timing. The word echoed, convenient. The same word Victor Hale had used on the hospital floor. Clara's pulse quickened. I didn't stumble across anything. The dog knew. He led me there. He pressed against her body to keep her warm until help came. If not for him, she'd be dead. Rowan's expression didn't change, but his silence pressed harder than any accusation. Finally, he asked, This dog, does he belong to you? No. Clara shook her head. He's a stray. Scar across his face, missing ear. He's been in the park for weeks. I saw him before all this happened. He's different, disciplined, not like a pet. Rowan scribbled something in his notebook. Different, disciplined, but not yours. He looked up again, his gaze narrowing. Yet the first word that girl spoke in days was his name, Hunter. Clara's throat tightened. Yes. Strange, don't you think? A child, traumatized, barely clinging to life. And the only name she utters is the dog's, not her mother, not her father. A stray. It's not strange, Clara said, her voice sharper than intended. It's telling. For a moment, the air in the office felt like it had shifted, heavy and still. Rowan's eyes lingered on her, probing, suspicious. She knew what he was thinking, that she was involved somehow, that she had orchestrated something, that her story was too neat, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "You think I staged this?" Rowan's reply was maddeningly calm. "I think I've seen good people do desperate things for reasons that made sense to them at the time, and I think the truth rarely looks the way we want it to." The room went quiet, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent light. Clara drew in a steadying breath. Grace is alive because of that dog. That's the truth. Believe me or don't. But don't waste time circling me when there's a man out there who chained his stepdaughter to a tree. Rowan's jaw shifted, a muscle twitching. He closed his notebook, tucking it into his jacket. "I'll be in touch." When he left, Clara sank back into her chair, her whole body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. She pressed her palms to her face, blocking out the buzzing light, the sterile walls, the weight of suspicion now shadowing her. Somewhere, a little girl was still too afraid to speak. Somewhere, a scarred dog was keeping vigil in the dark. And here, in the middle of it all, Clara was already being treated as a problem to be contained instead of a witness to be heard. The fight was only just beginning, and she knew the real enemy wasn't only Victor Hale. It was the system itself, with its suspicion, its boundaries, its hunger for easy explanations. And Clara Hayes had no intention of backing down. The hallway outside Clara's apartment was unnervingly quiet when she returned that evening. The air smelled faintly of fried onions from the neighbor's unit, but beneath it lingered something sharper, chemical, metallic, like paint. She slowed as she neared her door. The lock hung crooked, the wood around the frame splintered. Her pulse kicked hard against her ribs. "God," she whispered, fumbling for her phone. With one hand, she dialed 911, keeping her voice low as she reported the break-in. Then, cautiously, she pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, sharp aerosols stinging her nose. Her living room looked as though a storm had passed through. Drawers yanked out and dumped onto the floor, cushions slashed open, her bookshelf overturned. Papers fluttered like wounded birds across the carpet. But it was the wall that froze her in place. In thick, dripping red spray paint, the words screamed across the plaster. "Mind your own business." Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the world tilted, her legs threatening to give out. She forced herself to take a step inside, her shoes crunching over broken glass from a shattered lamp. This wasn't random. This wasn't a burglary. Whoever had done this hadn't come for valuables. They'd come for her. She moved cautiously from room to room, her heart pounding, half expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. But the apartment was empty. Just the wreckage, the silence, and those words burning into her eyes. The operator's voice crackled through her phone. "Officers are on their way. Stay on the line until they arrive." Clara nodded mutely, though she couldn't bring herself to speak. Her throat felt tight, strangled by the truth that was dawning on her. This wasn't just about one little girl and a chain in the woods. She had stirred something larger, something ruthless enough to reach into her home and leave a message written in blood-red letters. Minutes stretched long, each second magnified by the pounding of her own heartbeat. When the knock came at her door, she jumped so violently that the phone slipped from her hand. Burlington PD. 2 uniformed officers entered cautiously, scanning the space with practiced eyes. Behind them came Detective Marcus Rowan, his grey suit rumpled, his expression unreadable. He took in the room with one sweep of his gaze, the overturned furniture, the splintered door, and the words on the wall. His jaw tightened. "Well," he muttered, "looks like you've got someone's attention." Clara folded her arms tightly across her chest, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. "You think?" The sarcasm slipped out before she could stop it, raw from fear. Rowan glanced at her, one brow lifting. "When did you leave this morning?" 8. Straight to the office. Then the hospital. "I haven't been back until now." He scribbled in his notebook, his pen scratching. "Nothing taken?" "Nothing I can tell. They weren't looking for valuables." Her voice broke slightly. "They were sending a message." Rowan's eyes flicked back to the wall. The dripping letters glistened like fresh wounds. "Seems that way." One of the officers approached. No signs of forced entry beyond the lock. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, fast, deliberate. Probably used a bump key. Rowan nodded absently. His gaze lingered on Clara, studying her face with the same weary suspicion he'd carried since their first meeting. "You're sure you haven't been in contact with anyone outside your department? No press? No friends tied to the Hales?" Her chest tightened. "No. I've only spoken to you, to Dr. McKay, to my supervisor. That's it." Rowan scribbled again, then closed the notebook with a snap. "Then somebody doesn't like that you're involved. Which means you're closer to the truth than they're comfortable with." The words should have felt like vindication. Instead, they felt like a weight pressing harder against her ribs. She turned back to the wall, staring at the letters as if they might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. But they didn't. They dripped slowly, stubbornly, like an open wound refusing to close. Mind your own business. She remembered Victor Hale's grip on Evelyn's shoulder, the way Evelyn's eyes had dropped, silence before words could form. She remembered Grace's drawings, the cages, the shadows, the chains. And she realized with a sick certainty that she was now inside the same web of intimidation that had silenced everyone else. Rowan's voice broke the silence. "You'll need to find somewhere else to stay tonight. We'll dust for prints, but don't expect much. Whoever did this knows how to avoid leaving evidence." Clara forced herself to nod, though her knees felt weak. "Where do you suggest I go?" "Somewhere public. Somewhere they can't get to you easily." His eyes narrowed. "And for your own sake, keep your head down. If you push too hard, too fast, you won't just be endangering yourself." The implication was clear. She looked at him, anger sparking through the fear. "If I stay quiet, if I walk away, Grace goes back to them. And the next time, we'll be looking for a body instead of a child." Rowan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The lines in his face said he knew she was right. But the silence between them carried the weight of what he couldn't promise. That the system would protect her, or Grace, or anyone caught in Victor Hale's orbit. When the officers finally left, Clara stood alone in her ruined apartment. She traced one hand across the painted words, her fingertips smearing the red slightly. The paint was still tacky, still fresh. Whoever had done this had been here only hours ago, maybe minutes. She closed her eyes, drawing in a trembling breath. Somewhere in this city, people were watching her, waiting for her to falter. She wasn't just a social worker who had stumbled across a missing child. She was now a target, and the battle had only just begun. Clara had not intended to bring him home. When she'd left the hospital that evening, her nerves still rattling from the chaos at her apartment, the last thing she wanted was another responsibility. But there he was, waiting in the shadows of the parking lot, amber eyes steady, scarred face turned toward her like he'd been expecting her all along. The German shepherd limped forward as she approached her car. The overhead light caught the torn edge of his missing ear, the pale line of the scar crossing his muzzle. He didn't whine. He didn't beg. He simply stood there, breathing clouds into the autumn night, his body still as stone, except for the faint tremor of exhaustion in his legs. Clara stopped a few feet away. "You should run," she whispered. "Whatever's coming. It's not safe for you either." But the dog didn't move. He just looked at her, eyes burning with a strange mix of defiance and devotion. It was the same look she'd seen when he pressed himself against Grace's frail body under the oak tree, keeping her alive with his warmth. That look had haunted Clara ever since. She opened her car door. "Fine," she murmured. "But you're on your own if you bite the furniture." The shepherd climbed in without hesitation, curling on the passenger seat as though it had been his spot all along. His fur carried the scent of damp leaves and old wounds. Clara rolled down the window slightly and started the engine, a flicker of unease rippling through her chest. Back at her apartment, she hesitated at the threshold. The red letters on the wall had been scrubbed away by a professional cleaning crew, but she still saw them whenever she blinked. "Mind your own business." The dog padded past her, his nails clicking softly on the floor, nose twitching as he surveyed the space. He sniffed each corner, every overturned piece of furniture, before finally circling once and sinking heavily onto the rug. For the first time since the vandalism, Clara felt a strange comfort settle in the room. Not safety, not yet, but presence. She crouched beside him. Up close, the scars were worse than she'd realized. Old burns, jagged cuts, the kind of injuries that spoke of deliberate cruelty, not accidents. And yet, in his amber eyes, there was something unbroken. Something that watched her, measured her, and hesitantly trusted her. "You need a name," she murmured. "I can't keep calling you dog." The word came to her unbidden, as if whispered on the cold night air. "Hunter." Her voice softened. "Hunter. That's who you are, isn't it? You're not running. You're tracking, guarding, hunting the truth." The shepherd's ears twitched at the sound. He lowered his head onto his paws, but his eyes never left hers. That night, Clara slept poorly on the couch. Hunter sprawled nearby like a sentinel. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, her eyes flew open. But each time, the dog was there, watchful, steady, his scarred face turned toward the door. The next morning, Clara returned to the hospital. Grace was awake, sitting propped against her pillows, a notepad and crayons scattered across the tray table. Dr. McKay hovered nearby, speaking gently about colors and feelings, about how sometimes drawing was easier than words. When Clara entered, Grace's eyes lifted immediately. The girl didn't smile, not exactly, but something shifted in her gaze, like recognition, like the fragile tether between them had grown stronger overnight. Clara sat beside the bed. "How are you feeling today?" she asked softly. Grace picked up the notepad, her small fingers trembling slightly as she wrote in block letters, "Where is Hunter?" Clara felt her throat tighten. She glanced at Dr. McKay, who arched a brow but said nothing. Turning back to Grace, she nodded. "He's safe. At my apartment. He came with me last night." Grace exhaled, a sound that was almost relief. She picked up a blue crayon and began to sketch quickly. Within moments, a rough but unmistakable drawing of the scarred shepherd appeared on the page. His missing ear, the line of his scar, the alert tilt of his head. Beneath it, she scrawled one word in uneven letters. Hunter. Clara brushed a hand against the page, her chest aching. "So that's his name," she whispered. Grace nodded fiercely. Her eyes, usually so dull with fear, glimmered for the first time. She tapped the drawing, then placed her hand over her own heart. Hunter wasn't just a dog to her. He was proof that she hadn't been alone in the darkness. Dr. McKay studied the exchange, her voice low but certain. This bond between Grace and that dog, it's not incidental. It's anchoring her. Don't underestimate it. Clara swallowed hard. She already knew. Grace had found her voice not for her mother, not for her stepfather, not even for the nurses, but for Hunter. And in his scarred eyes, Clara had seen the same thing, a wounded soul recognizing its mirror. The veterinary clinic sat on the corner of Willow and Main, a squat brick building with faded posters of smiling golden retrievers taped to its windows. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and faintly of hay, as though some of the countryside still clung to the place. Clara had called ahead that morning, explaining only that she'd taken in a stray shepherd who needed a checkup. She hadn't told them the whole story. She barely knew how to put it into words herself. Hunter padded beside her as they entered, his gait uneven, his amber eyes flicking across every shadow. The receptionist glanced up and froze. For a moment, her professional smile faltered at the sight of his scars and missing ear. Clara felt a sting of defensiveness rise in her chest. "He's not dangerous," she said softly. "Just hurt." The woman nodded quickly, typing something into the computer before handing over forms. "Dr. Patel will see you shortly." In the exam room, Hunter stood tall but still, letting Clara rest a hand on his back. His ribs showed faintly through his coat. His scars, under the harsh fluorescent light, looked harsher than ever. She whispered, "You're safe here," though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. Dr. Patel entered, a man in his early 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rim glasses. "So, this is the patient," he said, crouching carefully. He didn't reach for Hunter at first. Instead, he let the dog sniff his sleeve, study his face, decide for himself. Only when Hunter's posture eased slightly did Patel extend his hand to stroke his fur. "Well," the vet murmured, "he's alert. Disciplined posture. Not the usual stray." His fingers probed gently along Hunter's scarred muzzle, the torn ear, the healed ridges across his side. These injuries, some are old, some not, and not all from accidents. He sighed. "Let's scan him, see if he's chipped." Clara's heart kicked. She hadn't even thought of that. Dr. Patel fetched the handheld scanner, its small screen flickering to life. He passed it slowly over Hunter's shoulders, down his back. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint hum. Then the machine beeped. A number appeared on the screen. "Ah," Patel said, eyebrows lifting. "He is chipped. Let's pull the record." Clara leaned closer, her throat tight. Hunter stood still as stone, eyes locked on Clara, as though he knew what this moment meant. The vet typed the digits into the database. After a pause, a file appeared. He read silently, then looked up, his expression shifting. "His registered name is Maximus," Patel said quietly. "German Shepherd, male, born 3 years ago. He was enrolled in a canine training program, Burlington Police Department." Clara's breath caught. "He was a police dog?" "In training," Patel clarified. "The file notes that he was dismissed before certification, reason listed as unsuitable temperament. No further detail." He turned the screen toward Clara. "That's unusual. Dogs usually wash out for health reasons, not temperament, especially shepherds." Clara stared at the record, the name Maximus blurring as her pulse thundered. She remembered the way he had moved through the park, disciplined, purposeful, like a soldier on patrol. She remembered how Grace's first word had been "Hunter." She remembered the scars. "What happened to you?" she whispered, more to the dog than to the vet. Dr. Patel's voice softened. Whatever it wasn't during official training. These scars aren't from drills or controlled environments. Someone hurt him after he left the program. He hesitated. Or maybe because he left it. Clara felt her stomach twist. She crouched beside Hunter, meeting his eyes. "So, you're not just a stray. You were meant for this. You were meant to protect." Hunter tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging her words. His amber eyes gleamed with something between pain and resolve. Patel continued, "He's underweight, dehydrated. Old wounds need care, but nothing life-threatening now. He's resilient." He paused, glancing between them. "Whatever he's been through, it hasn't broken him." Clara nodded, though her throat ached. Resilient. That word could have been written for Grace too. A broken child and a broken dog, both still standing, both still fighting. She stroked Hunter's scarred muzzle gently. "Hunter," she said firmly, tasting the name again. "Not Maximus. Not anymore. You get to start over too." For the first time, the shepherd leaned into her hand, pressing his weight against her palm, as if sealing the pact. Clara blinked back sudden tears. The bond was no longer a fragile thread. It was a chain, stronger than the one Victor Hale had wrapped around Grace's ankle, unbreakable, forged in pain and defiance. Dr. Patel printed the record, sliding it across the counter. "You should keep this. Might be useful." Clara took it with trembling fingers. On the page, the old name stared back at her. Maximus. A dog dismissed, discarded, forgotten. And yet, here he was, leading her into the darkest corners of Ravenwood, protecting a child no one else could reach. As she tucked the paper into her bag, she whispered again, "Hunter." The dog's ears twitched at the sound. His eyes burned with the kind of intelligence that defied dismissal, as though he understood that this name, this moment, was a turning point. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He was a survivor, a witness, a guardian, and now he was hers. The pediatric ward was quiet that afternoon, a kind of fragile silence that seemed to hang over the hospital like glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Clara moved softly through the corridor, Hunter waiting outside as per hospital rules, his amber eyes fixed on the doors, like a soldier barred from the battlefield. Inside Grace's room, the light was dim, curtains half drawn. The girl sat propped against her pillows, a sketch pad resting across her knees, crayons scattered like tiny weapons around her. Dr. Lauren McKay sat nearby, voice low, coaxing without pressure. Grace's hand moved with an intensity far beyond her 7 years. Each stroke of the crayon was deliberate, almost frantic. Dark lines, heavy pressure. The sound of wax grinding against paper filled the silence. Clara approached quietly. "What's she drawing?" she whispered. Dr. McKay shook her head. "She doesn't say, but she hasn't stopped for the past 10 minutes. Sometimes trauma speaks this way, before the words can." Clara nodded, folding her arms as a chill ran through her. Grace's face was tight with concentration, her tongue poking between her lips, her small fingers gripping the crayon until her knuckles whitened. Finally, the child dropped the black crayon and reached for a red one. Her hand trembled as she dragged violent slashes across the page. Then, slowly, she set the crayon down and pushed the sketchpad toward Clara. Clara felt her breath leave her. The drawing showed a large figure, towering over a smaller one. The small figure, clearly Grace, was chained at the ankle, the links dragging across the ground. The larger figure had broad shoulders, angry red lines for a mouth. But it was the detail that froze Clara in place. A wrist, drawn carefully, almost lovingly, with a large square watch shaded silver and black. Her mind reeled. She had seen that watch before. She saw it gleaming on the porch of the Hale house when Victor had addressed the cameras, his hand gripping Evelyn's shoulder with practiced force. She saw it flashing beneath courtroom lights when he smoothed his tie, when he gestured for sympathy. A Rolex Submariner. Distinctive, ostentatious, unmistakable. Clara's stomach twisted. She crouched down, leveling her eyes with Grace's. "Sweetheart," she said gently. "This man in your picture, can you tell us who he is?" Grace didn't speak. She rarely did. But her small hand moved, hesitant but steady, tapping the figure's wrist where the watch was drawn. Then she looked up at Clara, her blue eyes wide, shimmering with terror and truth. Dr. McKay leaned forward. "Grace, are you saying the man with the watch hurt you?" The girl's shoulders shook. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. Instead, she picked up a crayon, blue this time, and wrote, in halting letters across the bottom of the page, "He said no one would find me." Clara's heart clenched so hard it almost hurt. She reached out, brushing a strand of blonde hair from Grace's forehead. "But we did find you," she whispered. "Hunter found you. He didn't let you stay lost." The girl's eyes softened at the name. Her fingers reached instinctively toward the door, as though she could feel the shepherd waiting just beyond it. Then she clutched the drawing to her chest, as if it were both confession and shield. Dr. McKay straightened, her professional calm intact, but her voice dropped into something colder. This isn't just symbolic. The detail of the watch. Children don't invent something like that. Clara, if what we suspect is true, then Grace's stepfather—" Clara cut in, her own voice raw. "Victor Hale. It's him." The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on them both. Dr. McKay carefully retrieved the sketch. "We'll need to document this, present it to the investigators. It won't stand alone as evidence, but combined with her injuries, with Clara's testimony," she exhaled, steady but tight, "it could change the trajectory of the case." Clara stared at Grace, at the fragile body curled under hospital blankets, at the haunted eyes that still carried more truth than any courtroom witness ever could. Rage simmered low in her chest, a hot pulse that demanded justice. "Then let's make sure it does," she said firmly. Grace flinched slightly at the steel in her voice. Clara softened instantly, taking the child's hand gently in her own. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No matter what he told you, you're safe." For the first time since being found under that oak tree, Grace's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. She picked up her notepad again and wrote, slowly, carefully, "Hunter stayed with me. He never left." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She squeezed the little hand tighter, glancing toward the door where the shepherd waited like a sentinel. "Neither will I," she promised. The sketch lay between them, stark and damning. A child's truth, drawn in crayon, carrying more weight than any polished statement. And in that moment, Clara knew. The battle was no longer just about protecting Grace. It was about bringing Victor Hale's hidden world into the light, no matter how dark it turned out to be. The Burlington County Courthouse loomed gray against a pale November sky. Its columns held not only the weight of law, but of secrets. That morning, its halls pulsed with tension. Inside, the emergency custody hearing had drawn more than clerks and lawyers. Reporters hovered outside, barred from entry. The air inside reeked of coffee and nerves. Clara sat at the petitioner's table, hands locked tight. Beside her, Detective Rowan organized evidence. Photos of Grace's injuries, medical records, crayon sketches that spoke louder than words. One drawing, of a watch, sat sealed in plastic, its red and black lines cutting across the page like wounds. Across the aisle, Victor Hale leaned back in his charcoal suit, silver watch flashing. Evelyn sat beside him, pale and composed, scarf wrapped like armor. Their attorney, Maxwell Thornton, was broad, theatrical, his briefcase fat with papers he'd never use. Judge Eleanor Wilson entered, 73, silver-haired, her presence silencing the room. This is an emergency hearing concerning Grace Hale, age 7. We will hear arguments. Thornton rose, voice smooth. Your Honor, this is overreach. My client, Victor Hale, is a respected man, a father who loves his stepdaughter. These accusations stem from a traumatized child's imagination. He gestured toward Evelyn, who dabbed her eyes. This family has suffered enough. Clara's chest tightened. She'd seen courtroom theater before. Sometimes it worked. Rowan stood. Grace Hale was found chained to a tree. Her injuries are documented. Her drawings contain consistent details no 7-year-old could invent. She is terrified. The man responsible is her stepfather. Victor's jaw twitched. Rowan placed the photographs before the judge. Bruises in yellow and purple. Cuts. X-rays of old fractures. Silent testimony of a body carrying too many secrets. Clara rose next, voice trembling but steady. I am Clara Hayes, a caseworker. A stray German shepherd led me to Grace that morning. Without him, she would not be alive. Since then, I have seen her drawings, her silence, her fear whenever her stepfather enters the room. Grace is trying to speak, just not in words. Victor's cool gaze met hers, lips curved in a smile that never reached his eyes. Thornton scoffed. We cannot decide custody on crayon drawings and a social worker guided by a stray dog. Shall we dismantle a family on speculation? Evelyn whispered, I just want my little girl home. The judge's pen tapped the desk. Silence pressed heavy. Clara thought of Grace's hand pointing at the sketchpad, of the words scrawled in blue crayon. He said no one would find me. She thought of Hunter, waiting outside, steady as stone. Then the side door creaked. Dr. Lauren McKay entered, guiding a small figure. Grace. She looked impossibly small in her pressed blue dress, bruises still visible. In her arms she clutched a sketchpad. A low sound rumbled. Hunter, the scarred German shepherd, padded forward. The bailiff moved to stop him, but Judge Wilson lifted her hand. Let him stay. Gasps rippled. Grace's eyes lit at the sight of him. She ran, throwing her arms around his neck. Hunter lowered himself, pressing close, shielding her from the room. Judge Wilson's tone softened. Miss Hale, you may answer by writing, nodding, or speaking. Grace sat in the witness chair, Hunter beside her. Phillips, the prosecutor, asked gently, Grace, can you tell us what happened in the park? Her eyes flicked to Victor, composed, hands white-knuckled on the table. She shrank back. Take your time, Dr. McKay murmured. Grace lifted the marker, scrawling in shaky letters. He chained me. Daddy said no one would find me. The words were held up. Gasps filled the room. Clara blinked through tears. Thornton leapt up. Objection. Suggestive. Overruled. Judge Wilson snapped. Grace's chest heaved. Hunter nudged her hand. She looked at him, then opened her mouth. Her voice rasped but clear. He said no one would find me. The chamber froze. Weeks of silence, broken by a child against the man who had tried to bury her voice. Victor's mask cracked. Rage flickered. Thornton whispered urgently, but Phillips asked, Grace, can you tell us who he is? Slowly, Grace lifted her trembling finger and pointed, directly at Victor. Evelyn's tissue dropped. She reached for her husband, but he shook her off. Grace pressed into Hunter's fur. It was enough. Judge Wilson's voice was grave. Let the record reflect the minor has identified Victor Hale. For a heartbeat, silence thundered. Then Victor snapped. She's lying. He surged to his feet, chair screeching. Ungrateful brat! After everything I've done for you! Gasps erupted. Evelyn clung to him, but he shoved her aside. His eyes blazed at Grace. She shrank, clutching Hunter. The shepherd exploded forward, growling, teeth bared, body shielding her. Bailiffs! Judge Wilson's gavel cracked. Officers intercepted Victor as he lunged. Papers scattered. Thornton shouted in vain. Evelyn sobbed without tears. Victor fought like a madman, spitting curses. She's mine. No court, no judge, no mutt will take her from me. Hunter snapped inches from his arm as bailiffs dragged him down. It took 3 men to subdue him. Clara rushed to Grace, shielding her. He can't touch you, she whispered fiercely. Not now. Not ever again. Grace buried her face in Hunter's neck. The dog stood like stone, growling low, eyes locked on Victor. The judge thundered, Order! At last Victor was shackled, sweat shining at his temples, mask shattered. Judge Wilson's voice cut through. I have heard enough. Returning Grace Hale to Victor Hale would place her in immediate danger. Effective immediately, she will be placed under protective custody. The gavel fell like iron. Relief and burden washed over Clara. She brushed damp hair from Grace's forehead. Did you hear? You don't have to go back. You're safe. Grace answered by clinging tighter to Hunter. His scarred ear brushed her cheek like he understood. Furthermore, Judge Wilson said, Ms. Hayes, you will assume temporary protective custody until placement is confirmed. Clara swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. Reporters scribbled furiously. Thornton sagged in defeat. Evelyn collapsed in pantomimed grief. Victor glared, shackled, spitting hate. Clara rose with Grace's hand in hers. Hunter close beside them. Together they walked toward the side exit. Behind them, Victor's voice slithered one last time. This isn't over. She's mine. I'll come for her. Hunter growled, thunder rolling low. Clara gripped Grace's hand tighter. Not if we stand between you and her, she whispered. For the first time since the nightmare began, Grace exhaled a breath of relief. The girl, the dog, and the woman, bound by survival, stepped out together. The courthouse records office was nothing like the chambers upstairs. Buried in the basement, it smelled of dust and secrets. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Clara approached the counter, her heart pounding. "Research request," the grey-haired clerk asked. "Yes, Victor Hale. Previous marriage." The woman slid her form. Clara filled it quickly, forcing her hand steady. Minutes later, the clerk returned with a slim folder, stamped with a red seal. "Most is restricted, but the index is public." Clara carried it to a table and opened it. Sparse entries, marriage license, divorce decree, and one chilling notation. Wells v. Hale, Family Court, sealed by order, 2014. Catherine Wells, the ex-wife. A restraining order filed, but never granted. Allegations of physical abuse toward a minor stepchild. Then a note. Protective Services referral closed. Subject and child relocated out of state. Her chest ached. Another child. Another silence. She scribbled the details into her notebook. This wasn't history. It was a pattern. "Finding what you need?" Clara looked up. Frank Simmons, the retired officer who had warned her outside court, stood there, presence heavy as memory. "Enough to know this isn't the first time," she said. Frank's face hardened. "Catherine's girl, 10 years old, came home with bruises. I filed a report. It went nowhere." "Why?" "Because Hale had friends. Catherine dropped the complaint. Maybe fear, maybe futility. Some men know how to make trouble disappear." Clara closed her notebook, resolved sharpening. "Not this time." Frank's eyes held something close to approval. "Careful. Ghosts don't like being dug up." He left quietly, footsteps fading. Clara returned the file and stepped into the November wind, carrying the weight of what she'd found. Another girl, another failure, a shadow stretching years forward to grace. That evening, the silence in her apartment felt wrong. Hunter's body went tense as the door opened. Nothing looked disturbed until Clara saw the envelope pushed under the threshold. Plain, white, no stamp. Hunter growled low, hackled up. Clara tore it open. Children belong with their parents. No signature. Her throat tightened. A lie dressed as warning. Hunter moved to the window. Across the street, under a flickering light, a black SUV sat idling, windows too dark to see inside. Clara's stomach dropped. Her phone buzzed. Detective Rowan. She read the message aloud. Silence. Then, "Stay inside. Lock everything. I'll send a unit." "They're already here," she whispered, staring at the SUV. Hunter barked, paw slamming against the glass. The SUV's headlights flashed once, then off again. "We see you." When Rowan hung up, Clara sat clutching the letter. Hunter paced the window. Shadows stretched across the wall. She thought of Grace's bruises, her crayon drawings of chains and cages, thought of Victor's mask, cracking in court. This wasn't just one man's temper. It was something larger, systemic, protected by power. Clara slid the letter into her case file. Hunter settled by the door, a scarred sentinel. She stroked his head. "They want us scared." "But we don't scare easy, do we?" Hunter's amber eyes answered, without words. The SUV lingered until midnight before disappearing into the dark. But the echo of its presence remained. The diner at Ravenwood's edge was quiet enough for secrets. Neon sputtered, booths worn. Clara sat in a corner, Hunter at her feet, his eyes never leaving the door. When Frank Simmons arrived, a heavy coat replacing his old uniform, she gestured to him to sit. "You're deeper than you realize," he said. "I'm starting to understand," she admitted. Threats. Sealed files. Victor's past is buried for a reason. I need to know why. Simmons exhaled, memory weighing him down. 9 years ago, I answered a domestic call at Hale's house. Catherine Wells opened the door. Bruised, makeup smeared. Her daughter, 10 years old, hovered in the hallway. Bruises on her wrists. Clara's stomach tightened. I wrote it up as suspected abuse, Simmons continued. Next thing I knew, the case was reassigned. My captain told me to leave it. A month later, Catherine and her daughter vanished. File sealed, divorce finalized. Too clean. Why wasn't it pursued? Clara pressed. Because Hale had money. Friends in council. Judges who owed favors. A brother-in-law in the DA's office. Every time someone pushed, it got buried deeper. Clara's voice was taut. So he's untouchable. Simmons shook his head. He's dangerous. Men like Hale use fear as a weapon. You're in his way now. That SUV outside your apartment. Proof. Clara's fingers tightened on her cup. Then why help me? For the first time, Simmons's face softened. Because I failed that girl. I let the system swallow her. Maybe helping you set something right. Clara thought of Grace, fragile but unyielding. Of Catherine Wells, fleeing with her daughter. Too many children lost to cracks wide enough to swallow them. How high does his reach go? She asked. High enough to bury reports, seal files, make witnesses disappear, but not high enough to erase the truth forever. If you keep digging, you'll find pieces. Just be careful how loud you shout when you put them together. Silence pressed thick between them. Hunter stirred, ears pricked. Clara followed his gaze. Outside the fogged window, headlights glowed faintly. A car idled, watching. Simmons's lips thinned. See? He's already got eyes on you. Clara forced her heartbeat steady. Then I'll keep mine wide open. Simmons leaned forward. Do that. And remember, Hale isn't just a man with a temper. He's a man who knows how to use fear. Don't underestimate him. He rose, cap in hand. This is the last time we meet like this. But if you need me, really need me, you'll know where to find me. Clara watched him leave, swallowed by neon. Hunter pressed against her leg, steadying her. She stroked his scarred head. We're not backing down, she whispered. Not this time. Outside, the headlights flickered once before pulling away. The lot was empty again, but Clara knew better. The warning had been spoken. The ghosts were stirring, and the war against Victor Hale had only just begun. The hospital room was quiet, except for the hum of machines and the scratch of crayon. Grace sat cross-legged on the bed, blonde hair hiding her face, shoulders hunched in concentration. She hadn't spoken in days. Her drawings were her voice. Dr. Lauren Mackay sat beside her. You're working carefully, Grace. Do you want to tell me about it? Grace pressed harder with the crayon until the wax nearly tore the page. Then she shoved the pad forward. Clara stepped closer. The drawing showed a windowless room. 4 bare beds lined against the wall, tiny figures curled on each, and looming shadows with jagged red mouths. Clara's throat tightened. Are these from your house? McKay asked gently. Grace shook her head and scribbled more, adding a barred door and a tall figure with a watch. Clara whispered, "Oh, God." McKay nodded grimly. Multiple beds, confinement, shadows. It's consistent with trafficking trauma. The word hung heavy. Grace turned away, curling beneath the blanket. Hunter padded to the bed and climbed up carefully, pressing his scarred head under her hand. She clung to him instantly, her trembling easing in his presence. McKay lowered her voice to Clara. "If this is what it looks like, it's bigger than one abusive parent, and it could explain the threats against you." Grace lifted her head, scrawled in uneven letters, "Don't let him find them." Clara took her hand. "We won't. We'll keep you safe." Hunter's amber eyes glinted, as if he understood. Grace wasn't only a victim. She was a witness, and her drawings were a map. Detective Marcus Rowan's office hummed with fluorescent static. He sat across from Clara, fatigue etched deep, but his gaze sharp. Hunter stretched at her feet, eyes alert. Rowan tapped a folder. "We cracked part of Hale's computer. You need to see this." He slid printed pages across the desk, numbers, dates, codes. At first it looked like offshore accounts, but the labels match initials and birthdays of missing children. Clara scanned an entry. MC 0412, $250,000. Her stomach lurched. "Inventory," she whispered. "Exactly," Rowan said. "Financial transfers follow each disappearance. Sums wired offshore, then months later disguised as consulting fees or investments in Hale's accounts." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. Grace's drawings, beds, barred doors, shadows, weren't nightmares. They were memories. Rowan's voice grew rough. "This is a network, organized, funded, and Hale's in the middle of it." "How many?" Clara asked. "At least 7 entries match known cases. Dozens more we haven't decoded." Tears blurred her vision. Every line of numbers was a stolen childhood. Rowan rubbed his face. "The FBI is forming a task force. This is bigger than us." "And Grace?" Clara whispered. "She's not just a victim. She may be the only living witness." Clara pictured Grace curled in hospital sheets. Hunter pressed close. A 7-year-old carrying knowledge that could expose monsters. "She'll never be safe while he's out there." "We'll protect her," Rowan said. "But Hale slipped through fingers before. We can't underestimate him." Clara set the papers down with care. "Then we make sure her voice is heard, no matter the cost." Hunter rose suddenly, amber eyes fixed on the dark window. Clara followed his gaze. Outside, the night was still, too still. Headlights gleamed faintly in the distance, watching. The interrogation room was stark, its single light casting Evelyn Hale in harsh relief. She clutched her coat like armor, mascara streaking her cheeks. Across the table, Dr. McKay's voice stayed calm. "Evelyn, this isn't just about you. It's about Grace and other children." Behind the one-way glass, Clara and Rowan watched. Evelyn's composure was cracking. McKay slid a drawing across the table. Barred door, small beds, shadowy figures. "Did you know about this?" Evelyn's breath hitched. Her hand trembled to her mouth. "I knew about punishments. The chains. Nights outside. I told myself it was discipline. That he wouldn't really." Her words collapsed. "You knew Grace was being hurt," McKay pressed. "I tried to protect her. But if I push too hard, Victor doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. He made sure I knew what would happen if I defied him." Her haunted eyes lifted. You think Grace was the only one? Do you know what he did to Catherine? Clara stiffened. Catherine Wells, Victor's first wife. She tried to leave, took her daughter, filed papers. He swore he'd ruin her. Then suddenly she was gone. He told everyone she moved to California, but I never believed it. Not after the way she begged me, and I did nothing. Behind the glass, Clara's breath caught. Evelyn wasn't only complicit, she was trapped, consumed by fear. Rowan muttered, "Pieces, enough to build a pattern, not enough to convict." Evelyn's voice dropped. There were nights I heard things in the basement. Voices, more than one child. He told me they were nightmares, and I believed him, because believing him was safer. Her shoulders shook, tears streaking. McKay leaned in, voice both firm and kind. If you want to save Grace, save yourself. You must stop protecting Victor with silence. Speaking might free you. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. At last she lifted her head, resolve flickering. I'll testify about the punishments, the threats, the fear. But I can't give you everything. I never saw the other children. I only heard. I only feared. Clara's heart ached. Evelyn was both victim and accomplice, broken by the man she let break her child. Rowan's jaw tightened. It's a start, but it's not enough. Through the glass, Clara stared at Evelyn's trembling figure. The cracks in her silence might save Grace, or destroy them all. Rain blurred Burlington's streetlights into streaks of gold and silver. Clara pulled her hood low, guiding Grace through the parking garage. Hunter padded close, limping but sharp, ears pricked for danger. Detective Rowan waited beside an unmarked sedan, scanning the shadows. "We don't have much time," he muttered. "The patrol at your building was called off on a false alarm. Someone's pulling strings." Clara ushered Grace inside. The child clutched her sketchpad and a stuffed bear, Hunter pressing his muzzle to her leg as though anchoring her. Rowan drove through rain-slick streets, headlights cutting the dark. "Lake Champlain. My sister's cabin," he explained. "Remote. No digital trail. If Hale's people are watching official channels, they won't find you." The car wound deeper into pine forests, headlights swallowed by trees. At last, Rowan turned onto a gravel path. A small cabin loomed by the lake, roof gleaming with rain. Inside, the place was simple but solid. Stone fireplace, narrow loft, dust thick in the corners. Grace clung to Hunter until he padded a circuit of the room and sat squarely between her and the door. Rowan set bags by the hearth. "I'll check the perimeter, but I can't stay. Too much activity will draw attention. Trust the dog. Sometimes instincts see danger first." Clara nodded, glancing at Hunter lying alert by the fire. When Rowan left, Clara tried to build normalcy. Lamps lit, canned food on shelves, Grace's crayons on the table. The girl stared at a blank page, pencil unmoving. "You don't have to draw," Clara whispered. Grace finally spoke, voice barely audible. "Will he find us here?" Clara knelt. "Not tonight. Hunter won't let anyone hurt you." The shepherd pressed close, and Grace drew again, a cabin by water, a scarred dog guarding its door. Later, as flames crackled, Clara hugged her knees. The safety was temporary, fragile, but she promised herself she would not fail Grace, not Hunter, not now. By morning, mist drifted across the still lake. Inside, the cabin found a fragile rhythm. Clara stirred the hearth, boiled water. In the loft, Grace woke with her hand resting on Hunter's flank. She touched his fur before anything else. "Oatmeal," Clara offered softly. Grace nodded, sketchpad tucked under her arm. Breakfast was quiet, but her shoulders seemed lighter. When Clara set crayons on the table, Grace hesitated, then chose pale blue. Instead of cages, she sketched the lake. Clara turned away quickly, blinking tears. By afternoon, they ventured outside. Grace gathered pine cones, Hunter scanning the trees. At the water's edge, she touched the icy lake, gasping at the cold. When she splashed Hunter, his snort startled a laugh from her, the first Clara had heard. That night, Grace drew brighter colors, green for trees, gold for firelight, Hunter carefully rendered in every picture. She squeezed Clara's hand before sleep. Clara sat by the fire, listening to the child's steady breathing above Hunter's vigil at her bedside. For the first time in weeks, hope felt reachable. Moonlight veiled the lake. Clara sat wrapped in a blanket, book unread on her lap, when a faint crunch on gravel froze her. Too heavy for the wind, too deliberate for an animal. Hunter descended from the loft, hackles bristling, growling rumbling in the floorboards. Clara unlocked the box Rowan had left, hands trembling on the pistol. The doorknob rattled. "Hunter," she whispered. The dog planted himself before the door. The lock clicked. The knob turned. "Clara, it's me. Don't shoot." Dr. Lauren McKay stepped into the firelight, rain dripping from her coat. Hunter snarled once, then stilled. Clara lowered the gun, shaking. "Jesus, Lauren." "I tried calling. No signal. I had to come." Her face was carved with exhaustion, but her eyes carried worse, fear. Grace stirred upstairs. Clara reassured her quickly. Just Dr. McKay. Hunter, though, kept his guard. At the table, McKay's words fell like stone. Amanda Hale vanished from protective custody. Clara gripped the chair. Vanished? How? The officers were overpowered, but the footage shows her leaving willingly, walking out with a man in a hooded jacket. Clara's stomach twisted. So she chose to go. That's what it looks like. And if she's with Victor... McKay's voice faltered. Clara collapsed into a chair. She had wanted to see Evelyn, Amanda, as only a victim of fear. Now the lines blurred. Does this change Grace's safety? Yes, McKay said simply. If Amanda is with Victor, she knows your face. She knows where to look. The fire crackled. Clara felt the sanctuary teetering. McKay's hand covered hers. But listen, you've given Grace hope. The bond between her and Hunter, it's stronger than anything Victor can break. That matters. Clara thought of the child's newest drawing, the cabin, the lake, Hunter guarding the door, a fragile picture of home. Hunter pressed his head against her knee, amber eyes steady. I'll guard her. I'll guard you. Clara stroked his scarred fur, voice quiet but firm. Then we prepare. If Amanda's gone, if Victor's out there, we're not just hiding, we're targets. McKay nodded. You're not alone. Not anymore. And as the cabin settled into silence, Clara understood. Safety was no longer enough. They would have to fight. The knock came just after dawn. Sharp. Official. Hunter growled low, already on alert. Clara opened the door to two men in dark suits, Special Agents Ramirez and Dorsey. Their badges gleamed in the dim light. Inside, Ramirez placed a briefcase on the table, spreading files and photographs. The case against Victor Hale has escalated. It's federal now, and bigger than we imagined. Clara sat, palms damp. How big? Photos slid across the table. A storage unit stacked with children's belongings. A basement lined with narrow beds and restraints. Victor Hale is tied to an interstate trafficking network, Dorsey said. At least 4 states. Offshore accounts matching missing children's dates. Some cases go back years. Grace's drawings, beds, chains, faceless shadows, flashed through Clara's mind. She's been telling us all along, she whispered. Ramirez nodded grimly. Children remember what adults bury. We've made arrests, drivers, property managers, his bookkeeper, but Victor, he's still out there, Clara finished. Ramirez slid over a transcript, 4 words scrawled in an unsent email. I'll take back what's mine. Clara's eyes drifted toward the loft where Grace stirred beside Hunter. You and the girl are key witnesses now, Ramirez said. That makes you targets. Federal protection. Safe houses. Relocation. Clara shook her head. Safe houses can be compromised. Hale has friends everywhere. Hunter barked sharply, punctuating her defiance. Grace appeared at the stairs, clutching her notepad. She wrote, Is he coming? Clara brushed her hair back gently. He wants to, but we won't let him. Ramirez softened. We don't lose children. Not on my watch. When the agents left, silence thickened. Clara stared at the words. I'll take back what's mine. Grace leaned against her, Hunter pressing close, his amber eyes burning with a vow. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were in the middle of a war. That afternoon, the lake lay smooth as glass. Grace sat on a rock sketching. Hunter stretched beside her. Clara and Dr. McKay lingered nearby, letting the child lead the rhythm of the day. Her pencil no longer sketched cages or shadows, but a house with smoke rising, trees bending in wind, Hunter drawn faithfully at her side. She's lighter, Clara whispered. McKay nodded. Safety creates space. Words will come. As if summoned, Grace set her pencil down, staring across the water. Her lips moved, soundless at first, then a whisper. He can't find me here. Clara froze. McKay's hand covered her mouth, tears brimming. Grace turned toward them, gripping Hunter's fur. The shepherd pressed close, his body steady, his huff reassuring. You are safe. What did you say? Clara whispered, kneeling. Grace swallowed, firmer this time. He can't find me here. Clara gathered her into her arms. McKay knelt too, voice trembling. That's right, Grace. You're safe. The girl pulled back, adding softly, because Hunter's here. Hunter sat tall, vigilant, as if sealing the vow. Grace smiled faintly, her first real smile. On the page, she scrawled 1 word beside her sketch. Safe. Clara's vision blurred, but she let the tears fall, proof that healing had begun. That night, rain hammered the roof, steady and relentless. Grace hunched over her sketchpad, Coco cooling beside her. Hunter lay at her feet, restless, ears twitching with every gust. Clara rinsed dishes, McKay scribbled notes. When Grace slid the pad forward, Clara expected another lake scene. Instead, her breath caught. Heavy black strokes framed a small square cabin. At its window stood a tall, faceless figure. Jagged pencil lines radiated with violence. Grace's lips parted, eyes wide with fear. She scribbled in the corner. Now, McKay's head lifted. Now? Grace nodded, trembling. Hunter sprang to his feet, growling low, gaze fixed on the window. Clara peered out. Rain blurred the tree line, branches whipping in the storm. Nothing moved, but her skin prickled with the weight of unseen eyes. Grace rushed to Hunter, burying herself in his fur. He stood rigid, vibrating with tension. "This could be a memory," McKay whispered. "But hypervigilance isn't imagination." Clara crouched beside Grace. "You're safe. Hunter won't let anyone hurt you." The child grabbed the pencil again, sketching a final detail. A glint on the figure's wrist. A watch. Clara's blood ran cold. Victor Hale's watch. Hunter lunged at the door, claws scraping wood, bark shattering the silence. Clara dialed Rowan with shaking fingers. Grace drew him. "Watching the cabin. She says it's now. Hunter's on alert." Rowan's voice hardened. "Lock everything. Don't open until you see me. I'll have a team there within the hour." Clara hung up, bolting windows and doors. The cabin shrank around them, walls too thin, corners too exposed. Grace clung to Hunter, the dog's body a barricade of scars and muscle. McKay's voice stayed calm. "Sometimes drawings are warnings. Maybe she sensed something. Maybe Hunter did. Either way, it's real." Clara stared at the child, at the word trembling on the page. Now. Memory, fear, or shadow. It didn't matter. Somewhere beyond the storm, Victor Hale might already be waiting. The courthouse in Burlington stood like a fortress that morning, its granite facade washed in pale autumn sunlight. Maple leaves littered the steps, carried on a brisk wind that seemed to whisper both endings and beginnings. Clara guided Grace carefully up the stone staircase, her hand warm around the child's small one. On Grace's other side, padded Hunter. Coat brushed, vest secured, his scarred face dignified and solemn. Inside, the corridors hummed with restrained tension. Reporters waited near the lobby, hushed by strict orders not to approach the child. A bailiff escorted Clara, Grace, and Hunter toward Judge Eleanor Wilson's private chambers, where the hearing had been arranged to spare the child from the harsh glare of a public courtroom. The room was simple. Mahogany furniture, tall windows spilling light across shelves stacked with decades of law. Judge Wilson herself sat at the head of a polished oak table, dressed not in her black robe but in a conservative gray suit. At 73, her silver hair framed a face weathered by years of difficult rulings, but her eyes held the steel of someone who had always placed children's welfare above politics. Detective Rowan was already present, along with Dr. McKay, whose presence offered Grace quiet reassurance. Across the table sat Victor Hale's attorney, his suit impeccable, his expression carved into a mask of controlled disdain. An empty chair remained where Victor might have sat, but his absence was louder than any outburst. He was still missing, still dangerous, his shadow lingering over every moment. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Wilson said gently, addressing Grace with the respect of an adult. "Thank you for coming today. I know this isn't easy." Grace's fingers tightened in Clara's hand. Her blue eyes flicked toward Hunter, who nudged her side softly, amber gaze steady and calm. She took a breath, straightened her small shoulders, and nodded. Judge Wilson leaned forward slightly. "I have reviewed all reports, your drawings, the testimony of your doctors, Detective Rowan's findings, and Ms. Parker's guardianship evaluation. But today, I want to hear from you. What do you want for your future?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Clara could hear the faint rustle of papers from the attorney's table, the distant ticking of the judge's clock, even the steady exhale of Hunter at her feet. She knew this was the moment everything had been building toward, the child's own voice, if she could find it. Grace looked down at her lap, her hand brushing the fabric of Hunter's vest. For a long moment, it seemed she might retreat into silence again. Then, slowly, she lifted her chin. Her voice was raspy from disuse, trembling at first, but clear enough to carry across the chamber. "I want to stay with Clara and Hunter," she said. Every head in the room turned. The child's words, so fragile yet unflinching, seemed to echo louder than any shouted testimony. "They make me feel safe," Grace continued, her small voice gathering strength. "They're my family now." Clara's vision blurred. She had imagined this moment 100 times. But the reality of hearing it, this child, once silent from fear, now speaking her truth with courage, was overwhelming. Dr. McKay covered her mouth with trembling fingers, tears slipping down her cheeks. Detective Rowan looked away briefly, as though blinking back something of his own. Even Judge Wilson, unflappable after decades on the bench, set down her pen with visible emotion. She adjusted her glasses and regarded the girl with unmasked tenderness. "Grace," she said softly, "thank you." That was very brave. The attorney shifted uncomfortably, shuffling papers, as if the sound of a child's simple plea had unsettled his well-rehearsed strategy. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the child's feelings, we must remember she is only 7 years old. Such decisions require adult judgment, not emotional." "Enough," Judge Wilson cut in sharply. Her gaze sliced toward him, her patience worn thin. "Do not mistake youth for irrelevance. A child's voice carries weight in this court, especially when it has fought so hard to return." Grace blinked up at the judge, her lips pressing together as though holding back more words. Then, with sudden determination, she reached into her small satchel and pulled out her sketch pad. She flipped to a fresh page and, with deliberate strokes, drew 3 figures: a woman, a dog, and a child standing between them beneath a house roof. Over it, she wrote in careful, uneven letters, "Home." She slid the page across the polished table toward the judge. Judge Wilson stared at it for a long time before speaking. "Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, clarity comes not from lawyers or officials, but from the innocent. This is one of those times." The chamber fell silent. Clara sat frozen, Grace's hand still in hers, Hunter's steady presence anchoring them both. In that silence, the weight of years of fear, silence, and manipulation seemed to lift, if only a little. Judge Wilson straightened in her chair, her voice firm. "I will render my decision shortly. But let it be clear, this child has spoken. Her voice will not be dismissed." Grace leaned against Hunter, her head resting on his scarred neck. For the first time in weeks, her small body relaxed, as though she had laid down a burden too heavy for anyone her age to carry. And in that moment, Clara knew, whatever battles still waited in the shadows, they had won the one that mattered most. Grace had claimed her voice, and with it, her future. The courthouse steps were slick with fallen leaves, their gold and crimson edges dampened by the morning drizzle. Clara held Grace's hand as they emerged into the open air, Hunter padding faithfully at their side. Reporters clustered at the far end of the barricade, their voices a low murmur, but none dared to cross the line the bailiffs had drawn. Grace clutched her sketchpad tightly against her chest, her shoulders tense, yet her face, though pale, carried something it had not before: relief. She had spoken, and the world had listened. Clara squeezed her hand gently, guiding her toward the waiting car. Detective Rowan lingered on the courthouse steps, phone pressed to his ear, his expression grim. Clara could see the fatigue in the way his shoulders sagged, but also the vigilance etched into every line of his face. He ended the call and approached, his shoes crunching against the wet stone. "There's news," he said quietly, so Grace wouldn't hear. Victor's trail goes cold past the Canadian border. The Bureau believes he may have moved money through contacts overseas. Interpol's been notified. Rumor is, he's aiming for South America. Clara's stomach clenched. So he's really gone? Rowan hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Grace before returning to Clara. Gone, but not finished. Men like him don't disappear quietly. He's made threats. His last words before vanishing were, "I'll take back what's mine." The drizzle thickened into steady rain, tapping against the car roof like fingers. Clara looked down at Grace, who was staring up at Hunter as though the dog alone could keep her safe. For a moment, Clara wanted desperately to believe that was true. But shadows didn't respect walls or borders. They seeped through cracks, lingering long after the man who cast them was gone. Dr. McKay joined them at the curb, her umbrella tilted protectively over Grace. "The judge's ruling is a turning point," she said, her voice firm. "Grace is in safe custody now. That matters." Clara nodded, though the words didn't ease the knot in her chest. But safety isn't permanent. Not with him out there. Rowan's jaw tightened. "We'll keep watch. Federal agents are combing every lead. If he tries to come back, he won't get close without us knowing." Clara studied his face. Rowan was a man who had seen too much, carried the weight of too many promises broken by the system. Yet there was conviction in his tone now, as though this case had cut deeper than the rest. They loaded Grace into the back seat, Hunter leaping up beside her, his body pressed close, as though he too understood the threats whispered on the wind. Grace stroked his scarred head, lips moving silently, perhaps repeating the words she had said in court. "They're my family now." As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Clara watched the crowd fade in the side mirror. A man in a dark coat stood just beyond the reporters, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. For a fleeting second, her heart lurched. Was it Victor? The posture, the stillness, the aura of control. It was enough to freeze her blood. But then the man turned, revealing a stranger's weathered profile. Just another passerby. Clara exhaled slowly, willing her racing pulse to settle. Still, the image branded itself in her mind. Victor might be miles away, but the fear of him lingered like smoke after fire. The rain followed them through the city streets, blurring traffic lights into bleeding halos of red and green. Inside the car, Grace leaned against Hunter, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. For the first time in days, she seemed at peace, cocooned in the presence of those who had fought for her. Clara turned her gaze to the window, the courthouse shrinking behind them. They had won today. Grace's voice had been heard, her truth acknowledged. But victories were fragile things. And tomorrow new battles would come. Custody hearings, media scrutiny, the lingering reach of a man who refused to release his hold. She rested her hand lightly on Grace's small shoulder, feeling the warmth beneath her damp jacket. "You're safe," Clara whispered, more to herself than to the girl. "We'll keep you safe." Hunter lifted his head, amber eyes meeting Clara's in the rearview mirror. There was something unspoken in that gaze, loyalty, defiance, a vow forged in scars. Whatever shadows lay ahead, they would not face them alone. Outside, the rain softened, but the clouds above Burlington held the heavy promise of storms yet to come. And though Victor Hale's face was absent from the courthouse steps, his shadow stretched long, reminding them all that some battles end in verdicts, but wars are decided in the spaces between silence and return. The cabin by Lake Champlain had taken on a different air since their return. What had once been a place of hiding now felt like a sanctuary. Still remote, still small, but infused with something new. Hope. The storm that had shadowed their days seemed to be loosening its grip, letting light filter in through the thinning clouds. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting low over the water, painting the ripples in shades of copper and gold. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, filling the cabin with the scent of burning pine. Grace sat cross-legged on the rug, with a plate of fresh bread between her knees. Her laughter, light and unexpected, spilled into the room as she broke pieces off and offered them to Hunter. The German shepherd leaned forward carefully, taking each morsel from her hand with a gentleness that belied his size. His scarred muzzle brushed her small fingers, and Grace giggled at the ticklish whiskers against her skin. "You're silly," she whispered, her voice still fragile, but more confident than it had been. Hunter's ears twitched at the sound, and he wagged his tail in quiet agreement. Clara watched from the kitchen doorway, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since cooled. The sound of Grace's laughter struck her harder than any verdict, sharper than any ruling. It was the sound of life coming back, of innocence daring to return after being nearly extinguished. She blinked against the sudden wetness in her eyes. Dr. Mackay's words echoed in her memory. Children are resilient when given safety, but safety wasn't a place. It was people. It was rebuilt bit by bit. And as Clara watched Grace share her bread with the wounded dog who had never abandoned her, she realized this was what safety truly looked like. Grace tore off another piece and held it above Hunter's head, smiling mischievously. "Say please." Hunter tilted his head, amber eyes locked on the bread, then gave a soft, rumbling whine that sounded almost like a reply. Grace laughed again, delighted, and placed the piece gently on his nose. "Okay, now." With practiced patience, Hunter flipped it up and caught it mid-air. Grace clapped her hands, her joy pure and unguarded. Clara leaned her shoulder against the doorway, her chest heavy with a mix of gratitude and awe. For weeks she had lived in vigilance, doors locked, eyes on shadows, fear pressed like a stone in her stomach. And yet here, in this moment, fear seemed to loosen its hold. The cabin was still modest, the future still uncertain, but she felt something she hadn't in years: belonging. Grace glanced up at her, blue eyes bright with the unspoken question every child carries. Is it okay to be happy again? Clara set down her mug and crossed the room, kneeling beside her. She brushed a strand of blonde hair from Grace's forehead and smiled. "Yes," she said softly. "It's okay." The child leaned into her, resting her small head against Clara's chest. Hunter shifted closer, curling protectively around them both. For a long time they simply stayed like that. A child, a woman, and a scarred dog, stitched together by circumstance, but bound by something stronger than blood. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying with it the dry rustle of falling leaves. They drifted past the cabin window, crimson and amber, like fragments of fire tumbling from the sky. Clara's eyes followed them, and she thought of everything that had been burned away: lies, facades, the illusion of a perfect family. From that ash, something new had risen, fragile but real. Hunter sighed, lowering his head onto Grace's lap. His scarred face, once a symbol of violence, now looked peaceful against the softness of a child's dress. Grace's fingers threaded gently through his fur. She bent down, whispering something only he could hear. Whatever it was, Hunter's tail thumped once against the rug, slow and steady, like the beat of a promise, kept Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound etch itself into her memory. Grace's quiet humming, Hunter's breathing, the crackle of firewood. These were the sounds of a life reclaimed, the fragile music of healing. When she opened them again, Grace was watching her. "Clara?" the girl asked. "Yes, sweetheart?" Grace hesitated, her fingers still stroking Hunter's fur. "Can we stay like this? You, me, and Hunter?" Clara's throat tightened. There were still hearings to attend, forms to sign, systems to navigate. There would be more nights of fear, more shadows to chase away, but she knew the truth in her heart. Families weren't always born from blood or law. Sometimes they were forged in broken places where wounded souls found each other. "Yes," she whispered, brushing a kiss to the top of Grace's head. "We'll stay like this." Grace smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both weariness and hope. She leaned back against Hunter, who accepted her weight with the patience of an old sentinel. His eyes closed, and for the first time since Clara had met him, he looked utterly at peace. The last of the day's light slanted through the window, catching in the golden strands of Grace's hair and in the sheen of Hunter's scarred fur. The three of them were framed together in that autumn glow, a picture of survival, of a family not chosen but discovered. Outside, leaves kept falling, silent witnesses to the truth that even broken branches can shelter new life. And so the story closed on a single image, a wounded dog resting his head in the lap of a wounded child, while a woman, who had once been a stranger, sat close, guarding them both. Together, they were no longer victims of shadows. They were a beginning. Sometimes the hardest battles in life are not fought in courts or hospitals, but in the quiet moments when a wounded soul learns to trust again. This story reminds us why German Shepherds are cherished around the world. Their loyalty is unshakable, their instincts sharper than words, and their love as steady as a heartbeat. Hunter's devotion to Grace shows how animals can heal wounds that even people cannot reach. If you have a dog of your own, you already know what I mean. The way they look at you when words fail, the way they stay close when life feels heavy. If you'd like to explore ways to deepen that bond, there are gentle resources out there that speak to both training and understanding, not just commands, but connection. No pressure, no push, just something that might bring you and your dog closer. At the end of the day, love and loyalty are what matter most. If this story touched you, maybe give your dog an extra hug tonight. They understand more than we think, and sometimes they're the ones keeping us whole.